Now, in the latest, Israel has sounded an ultimatum. Release all the hostages held in Gaza in the next few weeks or prepare for a wider and more intensive offensive in southern Gaza. War Cabinet member Benny Gantz has said that the Israeli forces will push ahead with its offensive in the holy month of Ramadan in the far south area of Rafah. Meanwhile, Palestine health officials say that overnight strikes in Gaza killed more than 100 Palestinians, taking the death toll past the 29,000 mark. It has ignited fresh global concerns over the fate of 1.4 million Palestinians who are forced into Rafah near the Egyptian border.
We hope that the international community pressures Israel not to enter Rafah because the number of people that are in Rafah is big. Even if you want to displace them, how will you do it for such a number? 1.3 million or 1.4 million people need to be displaced. Where will they go?
Gantz pledged that the Israeli military will facilitate the evacuation of Gazan civilians in coordination with the United States and Egypt to minimize casualties. Ramadan, the fasting month for Muslims, is expected to start on March 10th. Ahead of Ramadan, however, the Israeli government says it will restrict the entry of Palestinians living in Israel and Jerusalem into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, remember, is Islam's third holiest religious site. Israel's security agency had warned that restrictions imposed on the access of Palestinians to the mosque during Ramadan could lead to trouble. But overriding its concerns, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has approved the recommendations of far-right Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to limit access for the Arab Israeli worshippers. Meanwhile, ahead of its Rafah offensive, Israel has so far failed to specify where Palestinians could flee after over 4 months of a devastating war that has flattened much of the Gaza Strip. Egypt, on the other hand, has stressed that it does not want Gazans fleeing into its territory. It has also argued that allowing this will empty Gaza of its Palestinian population. Satellite images show that Egypt is erecting a walled enclosure parallel to the Gaza border as a precautionary move in case of a mass refugee flight. Netanyahu has said a ground operation in Rafah is essential to eliminate the remaining battalions of Hamas. Talks aimed at securing a ceasefire and the release of the remaining hostages have stumbled in recent days as Netanyahu rejected Hamas's demands as quote-unquote delusional. Now, to discuss this further, we are being joined by Alex Treiman. He's joining us live from Jerusalem. He's the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate. Thank you so much for joining us here in this broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Treiman, Israel has threatened to invade the city of Rafah, but critics are worried that it could lead to collective punishment and thereby a violation of the international law. How do you see that?
Well, you know, most of the Gazan citizens have pushed south because Israel has told them to get out of the way as the IDF moves from the north into the south. Rafah is the furthermost southern city in Gaza, and it is both the place where now most civilians are residing or temporarily residing. It's also where most of the Hamas terror operatives are, as well as most of the hostages. So Israel is now considering ways to move the civilian population so that they can get underneath Rafah into the tunnels and hopefully capture Hamas's senior leadership and also find any remaining hostages.
All right, Mr. Treiman, we are also getting a major development. Israel says that it is levying restrictions on Palestinians from entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the Ramadan days. Netanyahu's office has in fact released a statement, and I'm quoting from there: "We made a balanced decision that allows freedom of religion with necessary security limits." How do you see this statement calling the move freedom of religion?
Well, we're talking still about more than 10 and multi-tens of thousands of people will get access to go onto the Temple Mount during the Ramadan prayers. But this mount has been used as a focal point for incitement against Jews, particularly during Ramadan, which has unfortunately become a month in which terrorism against Israelis has traditionally been higher than any other month in the year. And we're in a war right now, and there's a major fear that that the tensions could spill over into Jerusalem, where there's 250,000 Arabs, and that the Temple Mount could be used as a springboard for terror activities. So I think the state is trying to figure out a way in which they can allow for prayers to take place, but at the same time limit the number of people so that if the police do need to get onto the Temple Mount at some point, they'll have the access to do that and prevent a wider escalation.
Right. Mr. Draman, you make a fair point given how the past Ramadans have been, but don't you think restrictions on Arabs at a time like this will actually widen the conflict?
No, I'm hoping not. It's the opposite. By having the restrictions, you don't allow this point to become the focal point and the expansion point for greater terror. I understand that Hamas and many around the world want to try to use this as a talking point to say that Israel is the one that is going to blow up hostilities. Israel's in a war. On October 7th, Hamas had 3,000 of its terror operatives and civilians crossed the border and launched a war. These are security measures that Israel has to take in the middle of a war that it doesn't really want to be fighting, but it has no choice because it has to protect its citizens in Jerusalem, as well as Jewish holy places and Christian holy places, which are just meters away from the Temple Mount.
Mr. Draman, you say Israel is in a state of war and Palestinians say the same. Before I let you go, the Israeli cabinet has declared against a Palestinian statehood. How do you think Benjamin Netanyahu wants to see Gaza after the war ends?
Well, in Gaza, it's going to take a long time, both to get Hamas out and to make sure that it's completely demilitarized. And then you also want to see Gaza Strip be de-radicalized, and that can take a long time. So the question is, who's going to run Gaza the day after? It's certainly not going to be Hamas. Israel doesn't want it to be the Palestinian Authority, which lost control of the Gaza Strip to Hamas in 2007 and itself incites and funds terror activities in Judea and Samaria and elsewhere. The question is, can there be some kind of local governance that is not affiliated to Hamas? And also, can other Gulf states that have normalized relations with Israel in the last several years, can they form a broader authority which can help run the administration of the food, the medicine, and the rebuilding effort in Gaza while Israel controls the overriding security?